On Contact with Chris Hedges. Welcome back to On Contact. We continue our conversation with journalists Abby Martin and Ben Norden. So Ben, let's talk about why the Democratic Party is pushing this narrative. Of course, they started by trying to demonize the director of the FBI, Comey. That didn't work out very well, and so now they've switched. What's going on?
Well, I think the Democratic Party is incapable of self-criticism. And of course, the Republican Party is as well. But what this demonstrates is how these two parties in many ways operate on similar bases. So you have, Trump using these typical demagogic tactics where he scapegoats migrants and Muslims for all of his internal problems, instead of looking at, Wall Street, et cetera, and the system of which he's a part as a billionaire. At the same time, the Democrats are also incapable. They get the same money from Wall Street. Hillary Clinton was, as herself a multimillionaire who's made, millions of dollars speaking at different banks and such. So instead of looking at these domestic issues and recognizing their own problems, and this is a neoliberal party, instead they blame this foreign actor. It's the evil Russians who have, if it weren't for Russian interference, our democracy would be pure. I mean, it's a very demagogic tactic that's similar to Trump. And instead of dealing with these issues, instead of dealing with the fact that Hillary Clinton was the second least popular presidential candidate in U.S. history, she lost to Donald Trump, the least popular. Instead of dealing with the fact that this is someone who's incredibly corrupt, the Podesta emails were important, certainly, but most Americans already distrusted Clinton before the leaks of the Podesta emails. And if you look at polls, it's because of, her email scandal, which shows that in some ways, she's not transparent. And it also because of the Clinton Foundation, which has a lot of shady dealings. It's got millions of dollars from different Gulf monarchies, et cetera. All this does is muddy the waters further. And instead of looking introspectively, instead of dealing with the serious problems the Democratic Party has internally, they're doubling down. They're attacking Keith Ellison. They're attacking Bernie Sanders.
I mean, we should also add that her whole political career, she has been completely protean. So she's attacking super predators. She and Clinton rose within the Democratic Party by dismantling Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Coalition.
And dismantling welfare.
And 70% of the original recipients were children. And then she goes out and talks about, so there's a deep trust issue. But, Abby, there are extremely frightening and serious dislocations that are happening within America. And one of the things that I find just so disturbing is whether it's willful or unconscious, the inability on the part of the Democratic, I think the whole establishment, to face what they're doing and what's going on.
Yeah, and also, the inability to have self-reflection. It's this American exceptionalism mindset where you can't see what has America done to the rest of the world. And let's talk about Russia, namely. Right when the Soviet Union collapsed, it was basically colonized by foreign capital, led by Western capitalism, completely ravaged the entire country, completely just ravaged all of its resources, And when you talk about election interference, let's talk about Boris Yeltsin. We were boys with Boris Yeltsin. 1993, we actually helped usurp the first democratically elected parliament in Russia with the help of Yeltsin. He was the most unpopular candidate in the history of Russia. And then in 1996, what do? We highlight the fraud. We basically help him win that election on the front cover of Time magazine, boasting how U.S. diplomats actually helped Yeltsin win. He's there with little flags. I mean, we have the audacity to say Russia is the one interfering with our election.
Right. I spent 20 years overseas, and maybe you can talk to this. I've watched them spin election after election in Latin America and everywhere else. I mean, there's a long continuum here.
And it's not even just manipulating and exploiting different electoral processes. It's overthrowing elected governments throughout the world.
Dying.
Dozens of examples. I mean, you can go back. The famous examples in Iran. Iran used to be a democracy in 1953, and the U.S. overthrew its first democracy on behalf of BP.
Or R-Ariz in
the next year, 1954 in Guatemala. But you can go down the list. 73 in Chile. But the thing is, it's not just in the past. These things have continued under even the Obama administration, regardless of whether it's a Republican or Democratic administration. Under Obama in 2009, there's the coup in Honduras. Of course, there's the regime change in Libya in 2011. You can go down the list.
And Ukraine.
Absolutely. Yeah. Ukraine, and even before that, 2002 in Venezuela, where the U.S. did not want a popular. They had a successful coup, and Chavez was so popular that people came out into the streets and restored him. This is extreme hypocrisy for the U.S. to accuse Russia of what it's doing right now.
Chavez.
And the New York Times has the audacity to print, "Now you know how Chileans felt, America."
Yeah, well, this was Dorfman's.
No, we didn't have a fascist dictator come and usurp our democratically elected leader and then lead a death reign of terror.
With the help of the Chicago Boys and Milton Friedman and the free market fundamentalists.
What does this say about, Abby, the state of the political health of the country at the moment?
It's dying, Chris. You said yourself, I mean, we have seen a disintegration, bottom of the barrel, where now RT and a very few other outlets are the only ones left to actually tell the truth and disseminate the truth about what's going on to vast amounts of people around the world. And that poses the biggest danger to the establishment. So when they're pointing, it's really funny. You see this bipartisanship. Back in the 2003 build-up to the Iraq War, you had Democrats maybe asking for more proof. Now it's the Republicans asking for more proof. But really, the New York Times has been kind of consistent in their selling of these fabrications over the last decade. It speaks volumes to the state of media, the dysfunctional state of media in our society, where this is cheerleaded, a report like this, and people who question it are demonized.
But one of the things that's been, I've been in this business for now a long time, and one of the things that's so disheartening is the destruction of public broadcasting and the marginalization of any kind of critique that challenges not only the dominant narrative, but the power elites themselves, whether that's financial or political. It used to be back in the 1960s, you could see Malcolm X, Noam Chomsky, Howard Zinn. These were all figures on public television. And those of us who are not beholden to these powers and seek to critique them have been pushed and pushed and pushed. Telesur, English, I mean, you're one of the last shows they're doing. Most of their shows have been, because of financial reasons, shut down. Al Jazeera English is shut down. There isn't much place for us to go. And what I worry is that with this campaign, and 7 pages of this report are directed against RT, which does give voice to Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning and Ralph Nader and Medea Benjamin and all these dissidents who I would call truth tellers. Democracy Now!, there's almost no place left. And that's what I fear, that this is an incremental assault.
And it's assault not just on the media, it's assault on anything that is part of the commons. This is what neoliberalism is at its heart. It's an attack on anything that can be seen as public. Everything must be privatized. And of course, when it's privatized, it serves large corporations. It's about making profit, not about informing the public. And when you look at the history of U.S. democracy, of course, for the majority of this country's history, it was not a democracy. There was slavery, and then most, people of color couldn't vote, women couldn't vote. And then finally, there's a peak of U.S. democracy in the 1960s and 70s. And famously, the Trilateral Commission, these group of, 3 elites from, the U.S. and Japan, etc., including Samuel Huntington, this famous, liberal political scientist who's quoted in university still, wrote in this report called The Crisis of Democracy about how, the radical movements and the grassroots movements in the 1960s have empowered people too much to demand democracy. And from that point forward, there's a constant concerted attack on any of these grassroots movements, which is what these media outlets give voice to. Whether it's the Bernie Sanders campaign, which was completely ignored by corporate media outlets, whether it's the Black Lives Matter movement, which is often scorned and portrayed very negatively.
The anti-fracking movement, Standing Rock.
If these things are even acknowledged.
Right.
And this is part of a very concerted attack on anything that can be seen as public and as part of the commons.
Yeah, and over the last decade, we've seen a lot of strange bedfellows where it seems like the establishment would rather unite with fascists than socialists, right? They'd rather ostracize people who are more in line with Bernie Sanders, and Samantha Bee and Glenn Beck are now friends. But like you said, you won't see Howard Zinn on TV anymore. These people have been iced out because that poses the biggest threat, and so they act shocked when Trump wins. Well, what do you think you've been doing for the last 20 years?
Where do you see us going, Abby?
I agree with you. I think this is a very obvious attempt to foster the pressure to shut down RT and to really focus on RT first, Telesur next, Democracy Now! After.
Because essentially at that point, you've decapitated all of the venues, major venues, electronic venues anyway, for dissidents, and we should not ignore the fact that the Washington Post, through Proper Not, quoting Proper Not, has already mounted a campaign against primarily websites that give voice to dissidents.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, Proper Not is a very shady, anonymous group of supposed experts, although they won't release any of their identities, that made a literal blacklist of groups and organizations they claim. Exactly, including Truthdig and many of these websites, Truthout. But it's more than fundamental than just that. I mean, I think we should be very concerned. The Obama administration has used the Espionage Act to go after whistleblowers who leaked to journalists more than any president before combined. You know, this is under a Democratic administration. This is going to continue ramping up under Trump. And the irony is the same media outlets that have been rightly denigrating Trump for attacking the press are actually, I think, giving him so much ammunition that he can now use to further silence a critical press. Yeah. They're demonstrating why he's so critical. They're demonstrating why he's right to be critical of the press. And until there's a radical restructuring and a reversal of that, I think in many ways they're shooting themselves in the foot. And I'm very concerned as a journalist.
They totally are, because they're painting all basically non-corporate media as fake news,
well,
right?
It's traitors.
It's
really?
unbelievable.
Aren't they really? Yeah. I mean, that's what they did to you.
And like you said, I mean, Trump is going to have so much ammunition. His whole administration hates leftists. We're going to have Breitbart and InfoWars as de facto state media. We are in a very dangerous climate. And to paint this and have the establishment wing of the media back it up and say, yeah, this is all fake news, when half of those websites, Truthdig, Counterpunch, Truthout, are doing the real work to save this democracy.
Oh, Breitbart ran a profile of me as a Leninist. I mean, but it's kind of funny on the one hand, but it's not on the other, because these people have the reins of power.
Right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
That was Ben Norton, investigative journalist for Alternet, and Abby Martin, presenter of the Empire Files. Hillary Clinton initially blamed FBI Director James Comey for her election loss before switching to the more easily demonized Vladimir Putin. The charge of Russian interference essentially boils down to the absurd premise that tens, perhaps hundreds of thousands of Clinton supporters suddenly decided to switch their vote to Donald Trump when they read the leaked emails of John Podesta. Either that, or they tuned into RT America and decided to vote for the Green Party. The Democratic Party leadership cannot face, and certainly cannot publicly admit, that its callous betrayal of the working and middle class triggered a nationwide revolt that resulted in the election of Trump. It has been pounded since President Barack Obama took office, losing 68 seats in the House, 12 seats in the Senate, and 10 governorships. 900 Democratic state legislators have lost their seats during the Obama presidency. The Democratic Party must maintain the fiction of liberalism, just as the Republican Party must maintain the fiction of conservatism. These two parties, however, belong to one party, the corporate party, and they will work in concert, as seen by the alliance between Republican leaders such as John McCain and Democratic leaders such as Chuck Schumer, to get rid of Trump, silence all dissent, enrich the war industry, and promote the farce they call democracy. Welcome to our Annus Horribilis. Thank you for watching. You can find us on rt.com/oncontact. Until next week.